Hi everyone, if you don't remember me, I'm Matt. It's great to be back with you, and I'm really looking forward to this week because I know it's a really big topic and I'm sure we're going to have lots of great conversations in our groups. Now, I don't know about you, but it feels like we have done a lot in Matthew. So why don't we take a minute just to think about where we've come from so far. We have just finished the Sermon on the Mount. Yes, we are through it, but it's really important because we have just finished the key point of a summary of Jesus's teaching. This is the summary of what Jesus came to say, the gospel of the kingdom, the reason why Jesus was there. So why don't we take a minute now, turn in your groups, spend a few minutes. What has stood out to you so far? It could be all the way back in the birth of Jesus. It could be in the Sermon of the Mount. It could be anything in between. Share with the people around you what has stood out to you so far as we've been journeying through Matthew. So for me, what's really stood out has been getting to the heart of the issue, especially that time we spent in the Sermon on the Mount, getting to the heart of the law, getting to the heart of what makes us Christians, getting to the heart of what following God means, which is following God from the heart. But the reason that I think it is helpful that we've paused to look at the Sermon on the Mount is because Matthew's quite an odd writer. So unlike people like Mark, like Luke, like John, Matthew is quite thematic in the way he arranges the gospel. Now, what that means is he bases chapters and sections around the themes that are in them rather than where they happen chronologically. And one of the big themes in the early part of Matthew is teaching and then miracles. So we've had the Sermon on the Mount, we've had Jesus's teaching, and now in chapters 8 and 9, and a little bit in towards 10, we're seeing Jesus's miracles. So this is a really crucial point in Matthew because this is just before Jesus's ministry goes global, if we'd like to think of it that way. It is before the 12 disciples are sent out, before he really becomes well known throughout the whole of Israel. And where he not only has the ministry for himself, but he is now sharing it and bringing other people into it to share in it. So this is really crucial in terms of understanding Jesus's view of how he was meant to minister. And it is a big section. This is a really big section, and it focuses mostly on healing. And that's what we're going to be looking at this week, and it's what we're looking at on Sunday. We're going to focus on two passages in particular, just because there is far too much for us to look at in one go. We're going to look at chapter 8, verses 1 to 4, the healing of a leper, and we're going to look at chapter 9, verses 1 to 8, the healing of the paralytic. But we're going to start at the very end. And the reason for this is because there is a pattern throughout these chapters of the miracles increasing in impressiveness. We start with Jesus simply healing someone. Then it moves on to Jesus healing people from a distance. Then it moves on to Jesus controlling storms. Then it moves on to Jesus casting out demons. And then we see after this event, again, this almost a descent. So an impressive set of miracles that then move back towards the more ordinary, as if there were any miracles at the end. And we see chapter 9, verses 1 to 8 is this peak of miracles. And so it helps us understand what the other miracles are about. Now, as I've said, we're looking mostly at healing. Turn now in your groups, ask each other, what did you think when you saw that this week was about healing? When that message popped up in the group chat saying this week we're looking at healing, what were your first thoughts? Once you've done that, read chapter 9, verses 1 to 8. And again, pick out things, what stands out? What is it to you that you've got questions about? Is there anything that particularly you go, oh, that's really interesting, or that really speaks to me now, or I don't know why that's there? So, tell each other, what was your first thoughts when you saw that we were looking at healing this week? Read chapter 9, verses 1 to 8. And then, what stands out to you? Now, I don't know about you, but verse 2 really stood out to me, where Jesus says, "Take heart, my son, your sins are forgiven." Now, this group of friends have brought a paralytic, a man who is paralyzed, at least it looks like it's a man, paralyzed, at least from the waist down, possibly arms as well. They have been commended on their faith in coming to Jesus, and they have clearly come to Jesus wanting this friend to be healed. But Jesus doesn't do that. You see, in every other miracle, Jesus just does it. Or he asks a few questions and then he does it. But he doesn't do that here. He starts talking about sins. Now the question for me, at least, I don't know if this is for you, is why does Jesus start talking about sins now in this particular instance? Well, you see, the key to this is found in chapter 8. You see, in Matthew 8, verse 17, Isaiah is quoted. And the quotation is, "He took our illnesses and bore our diseases." So this is a prophecy of the Messiah from Isaiah. Don't recommend trying to say that too quickly. From chapters 62 and 63. It is Isaiah prophesying that the Messiah will bring in the kingdom of heaven. And so he is telling future Israelites what to look out for in the coming Messiah. And one of the key things to look out for is that he will heal people. But Isaiah, and most of the rest of the Bible as well, has a second meaning intended here. You see, illnesses and diseases are meant to point us towards a spiritual lack, a spiritual illness or disease, as it were. And we see this later on in the passage where Jesus says, which is easier to say? For me to say that this man is healed, or to say that his sins are forgiven? Now, it's much easier to just say that sins are forgiven. It's much harder to say to someone, get up and walk, because if they're paralyzed, they're not going to get up. So these illnesses, these diseases, these very physical things that can be seen straight away are signs of a deeper spiritual reality. The physical healing points to spiritual healing. The physical healing of our illnesses points to a need for the forgiveness of our sin. Have a think now in your groups and share as you feel able to. When you have thought about healing before, how often has that made you think about spiritual healing? How often has that made you think you need your sins to be forgiven? And why do you think that is? And it's really important at this point. This question isn't to dig into anyone. It isn't to point fingers and go, why haven't you done this? Why haven't you done that? It's a chance for us to think about why we think that way, to think why we haven't considered it. Because there might be a whole range of circumstances that mean it isn't something we've thought of. So turn in your groups now. When you think of healing, how often have you found yourself thinking about a need for spiritual healing? And why do you think that is? So with that in mind, that physical healing is a pointer to spiritual healing, and that Jesus comes to heal both, physically and spiritually. Spiritually is guaranteed. Physically doesn't always happen, as we know from our own experience, but as we see in these Gospels, not everyone gets healed. Most people do, but not everyone. We're now going to turn to chapter 8, verses 1 to 4. Read this now in your groups. And again, what stands out to you? So to give a bit of context, lepers. Now, leprosy at the time, this term in the New Testament and in the Old Testament as well, leprosy covers a whole range of skin diseases. But there were particular problems with leprosy. So leprosy is highly contagious, and it causes a range of bodily problems and a range of issues in people that mean the only way to deal with it is to shut people off. We're much better at dealing with it now in society, but still, if someone is found to have leprosy, they need to be isolated from the rest of the community, and then they undergo therapy and treatment to deal with it. But there was another element within Jewish society, because being cut out of the community meant they were unable to enter the temple. They were unable to worship God, and they were unable to join in with the general life of Israel. It was also shown as because of this cutting off from society, because of this cutting off from the worship of God, there are particular instances in the Bible where God uses leprosy as a punishment for people who deliberately disobey him. We see this with Miriam and with King Uzziah, who both deliberately disobey God and seek to lead worship in ways that God has told them that they should not. And so they are, leprosy instantly develops on them, most prominently on the forehead. And then after they have repented, after a passage of time has gone, the leprosy is taken away. But this caused a confusion for the Jews at the time. So in Jesus' time, the Jews wrongly believed that all cases of leprosy were punishment for specific sins. Much like the prosperity gospel churches that sadly we have around today, they believed cases of Miriam, of Uzziah, were signs of people showing a lack of faith, and so God punished them physically to show them that they lacked faith. That is not what Jesus endorses. We see in John's gospel that Jesus is asked who sinned that caused a tower to fall on about 50 people. And Jesus' response is, no one. Sometimes these things just happen. And the same with physical illnesses. Often these things just happen. But Jesus is now very particular when it comes to healing this leper. And he does a few things that shows that that's the case. But first, we don't really understand what it's like to be a leper. So let me read you a description that I have of a leper. The disease which we today call leprosy generally begins with pain in certain areas of the body. Numbness follows. Soon the skin in such spots loses its original colour. It gets to be thick, glossy, and scaly. In fact, the affliction is called leprosy because it makes the skin scaly. The Greek word lepos or lepis meaning scale. As the sickness progresses, the thickened spots become dirty sores and ulcers due to poor blood supply. The skin, especially around the eyes and ears, begins to bunch, with deep furrows between the swellings, so that the face of the afflicted individual begins to resemble that of a lion. Fingers drop off or are absorbed. Toes are affected similarly. Eyebrows and eyelashes drop out. By this time one can see that the person in this pitiable condition is a leper. By a touch of the finger one can also feel it. One can even smell it, for the leper emits a very unpleasant odour. Moreover, in view of the fact that the disease-producing agent frequently also attacks the larynx, the leper's voice acquires a grating quality. His throat becomes hoarse, and you can now not only feel, see, and smell the leper, but you can hear his rasping voice. And if you stay with him for some time, you even imagine a peculiar taste in your mouth, probably due to the odour. All the senses of the well person are engaged in the detection of the leper. So not only was this person cut off from society, their leprosy, whether there had been people casting them out or not, would have meant that they wouldn't have been around people. Imagine being around someone who was a leper. Imagine the odour coming from them, sticking in the back of your throat. Imagine seeing them. They would have mostly tried to cover their leprosy up, but at times it would have been so painful that they wouldn't have been able to. And imagine then hearing them coming to ask you for help, ask you for some money, ask you for some bread, rasping, their voice grating as they cried out for some help. In one sense, it's slightly easy to understand why lepers were avoided. There was that risk if you could catch it yourselves. And then there was this sense of this probably, at the first glance, would have looked quite scary. And so people wouldn't have wanted to approach them. But notice here, Jesus approaches straight away. He has no issue touching the leper. He has no issue coming near him, close enough that the smell would have been all in his nose and in his mouth. He would have been close enough to see where the skin was blistering, where blood was coming out. And as he touched probably the leper's arm, he would have felt the skin blistering, bubbles forming, blood flowing out. Jesus doesn't turn away from this leper, though everybody else would have. And he's not afraid to get ill. But notice also that the leper comes forwards in faith. He says, "If you will, you can make me clean." Now he definitely meant If Jesus, you desire, you can rid me of leprosy. You can make my skin clean. You can take this odor away. You can fix my voice. And you can bring me back into society. But he was also talking about a spiritual element. See, remember, the leper is cut off from the temple. He was unable to worship God. Who knows how long this leper had been unable to go and worship God in the temple. And he would have been aware of his own sins at this point, being left alone for so long. Long hours to think about all that he'd done in his life. If you will, you can make me clean, he said to Jesus. You see, the leper could have thought he had no chance of Jesus doing anything. He could have wondered whether Jesus would have been as repulsed by him as everyone else would be. He could have wondered, even if he got close and Jesus would have talked to him, would Jesus have healed him, a leper like him? But I wonder if we're tempted to think like that as well. Maybe when it comes to physical healing, we've had something for so long that we think it just can't be sorted. And sometimes God doesn't heal long illnesses. We may think, looking back on ourselves, looking at our sin, we may think, why on earth would Jesus want to come near us? Surely I must smell like the leper to him. But he wants to make you clean. He's not afraid to touch you. He's not afraid to get in with the mess where no one else will. If you ask him, he will make you clean. Or maybe we're like the paralytic, desperately wanting a physical illness healed. But what we most need to hear from Jesus today is that he will forgive you your sins. Whilst he may not heal your physical body, he will heal your soul and restore you to a good relationship with Jesus. Or maybe you're like the disciples. Remember, just after this passage, Jesus sends out the disciples. The disciples have seen Jesus healing. They have known that they are forgiven with him. They've asked him for forgiveness. And now they're ready to go out and proclaim it. Maybe you're a disciple. Have a discuss with people in your group. Are you like the leper? Do you fear coming to Jesus, asking for what you need, trusting that he will make you clean, worried how he will view you? Are you like the paralytic? Have you been desperately coming, wanting healing for so long, but now Jesus is prompting you to look for spiritual healing as well? Or are you like the disciple? Do you know you are forgiven? Have you seen people healed, and are you ready to go out and proclaim it to others? Once you've discussed that, pray in your groups. Pray like the leper, pray like the paralytic. If you will, Jesus, you can make me clean. See you next week.